All right. So, just so you guys know, we will do this meeting every week. Now, you guys can be here every week if you want. You can watch the recording. The meetings are better if there's people here. So, don't ruin your schedule over it. But if you can make it, I hope it's worth your time. I've gotten great feedback from students about it in the past. So I really hope that um, it's beneficial to you, worth it enough to come. Um, and before we get started on talking about Lab 1, I kind of just wanted to go over just some housekeeping items. So the first things first is a little bit about me. So I grew up in Etna, Wyoming. It's just south of Jackson Hole. If you think of the Grand Tetons, Yellowstone, it's just south of there, probably 45 minutes. Um, it's a beautiful place. Um, so that's where I grew up. I grew up on a dairy farm out there. My parents owned a dairy farm. My grandpa was a dairy farmer. So longtime dairy farmers or just farmers in general. So did a lot of that. Then I went to Utah State um, and got married there. That's my wife Taylor. She is definitely the better half of us. Um, then I went to BYU, Idaho. So this is a picture of me with, you guys probably know the name, or you will know the name by the end of this, Michael McLaughlin. He was a great mentor to me, fantastic guy. And he helped me get my first job at Oracle, and I worked there for a while. Um, and then I moved back home. Um, my parents needed some help with the farm, and there's a great opportunity here. So now I moved back to Star Valley. Here's a picture of our temple. Um, I got my master's degree. Have a master's degree in data analytics. We have two girls. Addison is the older one, and Rory's the younger one. Addison is 4, and Rory is about to turn 2. Um, and Addison is a sweet girl, and Rory is just mischievous and wild. And anyways, living in Wyoming, especially this part, we live at about 6,000 feet above sea level. But most of the mountains around here uh, get pretty high, so we get a lot of snow. We're about snow 9 months out of the year. In fact, it snowed about a foot last week. Um, so those of you who are in nice warm places can have pity on me. But I love to snowmobile. Yeah, about have to here because that's the only way you can stay sane. So my family and I, we do a lot of snowmobiling, get to see a lot of beautiful, beautiful country. So that's just a little bit about me, and I've already started reading them, and I apologize. I try to respond to as many as possible, but a lot of times I'm on my phone, and typing is just impossible on a phone. So I do read you guys as icebreakers, and I love reading them. So if you haven't written yours yet, make sure you tell me all the cool things about you and stuff because it's really fun to get to know you guys and where you're from and what you're all about. But anyways, that's me. So now we will jump into kind of a lot of the class type stuff. So just so you know, the way I love to communicate is through Teams. So if you aren't on the Teams yet, please get on the Teams. I'm guessing that most of you here are probably on the Teams. We have 26 of the 60 people in the team so far. So we'll keep trying to push that because the more people we have, the better the community is. So I'm really hoping that it's easy to get involved with. And this is my first term on Teams. Previously, we've used Slack, but Teams, you guys already have Microsoft accounts. So hopefully it's one less thing you have to kind of create. And you can use your BYU Idaho email and all that kind of fun stuff. And I switched to it at work, so I kind of got more used to it. And there's a lot of cool features that Slack doesn't have. But this is kind of my main way of communicating. So if you aren't on Teams, get there. And the other really nice thing that's kind of already happened, you guys will notice, is that you guys actually help each other a lot, which is a big part of the BYU Idaho model, and a big part of why I think their online programs are so successful is because teach one another is a big part of this, and we're all in this together really. And so I hope that Teams can be more conducive to that. Discussion boards, my problem with discussion boards is that they're just so slow, because you don't really get too many notifications about it. So someone puts a post on the discussion board and And a lot of times, I only check discussion boards once a day, but I'm on Teams all day, every day. So you guys have probably already noticed that I respond pretty much all hours. And I'm not even going to say the day because there's a lot of times I'm up at about 2 in the morning. And so please turn there's a setting that you can turn your hours of notification off. Please do that because I may respond to you. But I do try to respond as fast as possible, and Teams really helps with that. And also, a lot of times we're just trying to send screenshots back and forth. And when you're using email or something like that, things can get really slow. So Teams is really nice, and it's really transformed uh, the way that my classes work. So I try to get everybody on there. If for whatever reason you just don't want to use Teams or both, the other main form of communication that I really like to use is the announcements. I try to, anything that's vital to the course, I really try to put in some announcements. And I can promise you, because I know how it is when you get a million announcements or a million inbox things from one teacher a week. So what I try to keep it down to is I try to post just a couple times every week. So what you'll see from me on a normal week, given that there's no emergencies, is you'll see one like this that has the overview of the week. And then another one will come out that has the weekly recording. So once this is over, I'll get it all prepared and I'll shoot everybody a link, and it will be in a new announcement. Other than that, those should be the only two you get from me. The only time you might see another one is if there's some big problem with the lab, or a lot of people are hitting the same issue, or there's something like that. Then what I'll do is I'll send out another announcement to everybody. But I do try to keep it to a bare minimum. Try to go for quality over quantity. Um, so that's kind of my philosophy on that. And just another thing I wanted to reiterate, because I kind of hit about it inside of this week one announcement, but just since I have you all here, um, I kind of like to run the course like a business, or at least how you're going to be out there. I don't know, many of you already are, but basically same rules that it would apply at work. So if you communicate in advance, I will accept late work without penalty. You'll get full points. Um, really, as long as you, and I put that down on number 3, communication is the key. As long as you're just talking to me, letting me know what's going on, um, I'm not even going to worry about late work. If you say, hey, having a rough week, the lab may be late, great. You know what? And one heads up is that you will get marked a 0 on that until it's turned in. That's just so my grade book is up to date, and then you guys know where you sit currently. Um, but once you turn it in, you'll get full points, no problem. And the other thing that I really like to do, because there is no penalty if you turn it in before I grade all the submissions. So just so you know, the due date's midnight at Saturday at midnight, I believe, or Saturday at 11 is when most of the deadlines are. Well, if you turn it in on Sunday, because I don't do any work on Sunday, if you turn it in, at 1:00 on 1:00 in the morning on Sunday, because you were up all night working on it or whatever, you're not going to get docked. So if it's in when I go do my grading of everybody's, you'll get your full points. And so I can tell you from past things, is as long as you're halfway keeping up or communicating with me, you're gonna get full points, even if it's a little bit late. So you don't need to worry about, oh, I've only got 3 minutes to submit this. Don't fret about it. It'll be fine. And then number 2 is you can submit any lab with corrections for full points. So let's say you turn in your lab, and you didn't quite have it all the way there. Well, I'm going to let you know that. I'll grade it as such. And then if you fix your lab and resubmit it, I'll give you all your points back. So, as long as you're trying, that's kind of what, I've always been a big fan. In fact, my brother, who's an actual teacher in a high school, does the same thing. And he calls it mastery learning, because even out there in the real world, you're working on a project. I would be lying if I said every project I did was without its hiccups or bugs. And so I'm a big fan of, part of learning is fixing those mistakes and learning from those mistakes. And I believe that as students, you should be rewarded as such. Otherwise, there's really not much incentive to go fix your work. So um, if there's a problem with your lab, please just, I'll try to tell you the best of my ability what you need to fix. Um, and then you can do the work, do the research, and fix it and resubmit it for full points. Okay. And that's kind of, technology is very much an iterative process. You kind of do some work, you test it, and maybe you tested it and it worked or whatever. We find a mistake um, later on down the line or whatever, you can fix it and get full points. Communication is key. We kind of already talked about that one. And then number 4, don't be afraid to ask for help. This is a big one. And I always tell people, we know where that line is, to where you've been working on something that should, and I kind of say this should not be that complicated kind of a feeling. And you are, working on the same thing for about an hour, just banging your head against the wall. The minute that starts to happening, I feel like your learning really degrades, because you go from, ooh, this is fun, exciting, I'm learning, to, oh, all of a sudden now I am just in survival mode. I just want to get this done. Right. And I feel like that's not very good for learning. So when you hit that point, or preferably before you hit that point, don't hit that point, shoot a question in the Teams. That's another big part of why we use Teams. Because odds are one of your peers has already solved the solution. One of your peers has maybe already come across a similar issue and solved it, or me or a TA can help you through it. More than happy to. So if you have a problem, don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't wait too long. Now, there is that thing where, you definitely want to make an attempt, but we all know kind of where that line is. So don't be afraid to ask for help, because that's why we're all here. Okay, any questions about that before I keep going? Any questions so far? And I guess just general structure for the week, if someone's typing a question, general structure for the week is really all you're going to have is your lab every week. Some weeks like this week, you'll have your introduction discussion board and a few of the extra things this week. But in the future going forward, it should be pretty much be a lab. We don't have weekly quizzes or anything like that. So it's pretty much going to be a lab, which is really nice, because then you can kind of just focus on the lab. And the labs are actually really quite fun. So I think you guys will actually enjoy them, especially, and I know I've mentioned this in Teams, they have made quite a few changes to the labs 1 through 5. Labs 1 through 5 have been completely rewritten. And I think it's going to make a huge improvement in the course. So I'm actually really excited for you guys. You guys kind of get the the cream of the crop as the course is right now. So it's been something we as instructors have been pushing for a long time, and it got done. So we're pretty excited about that. Okay. And yeah, so good question. So that's what we're going to get into now. Is week 1 is really all about setting up our development environment. And so I guess just as a little bit of background, what we're going to be doing is we are going to be using a virtual machine. And for those of you who don't know what a virtual machine is it is a operating system that runs on your computer. So just as a way of explaining a little bit more, I use Linux on my desktop here. That's why it probably looks a little bit different to a lot of you, which is what we're actually going to be using in the course, just a different version of Linux. But pretend this is Mac or Windows or whatever. You could run a Windows VM on your Macintosh, or vice versa. In fact, I have a Windows virtual machine that I use quite frequently to do Windows stuff. And so virtual machines is something that you're going to be using quite a bit in your jobs, whether you already are using them or whether you will be. But what we're going to be using is a piece of software called Vmware Player or Vmware Workstation, whichever one you downloaded. So you'll download VMware Workstation and Player. And does anyone have, for Melissa, who said she was having problems completing the install, which part? Is it with VMware or is it with the actual Fedora instance? And while you're typing that, I'll keep going. So Calvin asks, what Linux distro do you run? And I run Pop! OS, and it is based on Debian Ubuntu. Um, so yeah, I'm a big Debian person, but Pop! OS I've really come to enjoy. In fact, this is the 2004 beta. Okay, with the Fedora part is what Lance said. So yeah, let me keep moving forward, and we will hopefully get there. And just so you know, I did have a little bit of issues with the download my first time, and I had to re-download it myself actually. So hopefully none of you guys have that same issue. So what we're gonna do, and this is all in these instructions. So in fact, I'm gonna go here, and I can kind of show you some of this. So if we go to modules and week 1. All right, so it has a couple options for you here, and I even add one more. So the first thing you're going to want to do is download the Fedora image. And what the image is, when they talk about an image, is you're actually downloading a snapshot of someone else's computer. Okay, so you're going to download the image from either the Dropbox, which I've been told doesn't work anymore. So what I would prefer is to download from either the university's secure file transfer protocol, SFTP, which stands for Secure File Transfer Protocol, using an SFTP client of your choice. So they use CyberDuck because they're on Windows. CyberDuck's also on Mac. I prefer FileZilla, which I'm not sure why they say not recommended, but I use FileZilla. Okay, Dropbox works for you guys. Okay, so whichever one works. Now, I will say that if you want to download the fastest, I'm sure you guys are familiar with BitTorrent. Well, I have set up a BitTorrent version of this download, and I am seeding it. So if you need to use the BitTorrent file, because it will probably be the fastest. And the reason why I set up the BitTorrent is because it will hold on to your progress as you download. So if you're on a place with a not so great internet connection, or if your power goes out frequently, or if you just want to use it, in fact, most of the time whenever I do large downloads, I use BitTorrent. Just because if you do have a network hiccup, it checks for it. And so what you can do is you can download, and I kind of have some instructions here. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but you can get a torrent client like Transmission, and then download the file, and it should just open up the file in Transmission, and it will start to download. And if you know someone who's also downloading, you can leave yours seeding, because while you're downloading, it's also going to share your stuff with the rest of the class. And the more people we have seeding, the faster it's going to download. It can actually get crazy, insane fast to the point where it's only bottlenecked by your internet. So if you want to use that one, you can. Otherwise, these instructions are here. Now, once you download this file, you are going to end up with, let's see if we can pull it up here. You're going to end up with a file that looks like this. It's going to be the name and it's going to be a .zip. Okay, so you're gonna extract that zip, and then you end up with a file that looks like this. It's pretty much just the name of the zip file. But the real important part is that right inside of there, it says VMware VM, and that is your actual virtual machine. Now, if you're on a Windows or a Mac, this might actually show is like an icon instead of like a folder. It is actually just a directory, but I believe on Windows or Mac, if you have VMware installed, it will just show as like a clickable icon. And then once you have that, and it's actually this one right here. Once you have that, extracted and ready to go, you should just be able to open this up in VMware Player. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to open up VMware Player, and I will go to File, Open a Virtual Machine, and I will go to where I put that, which was in Images and that .vmware VM. And so once you're on this folder, you can actually just click Open, and on Mac and Windows, it should just open right there. But if not, just go into the .vmx file, and then you can say open just like that. And this is what we end up with right here. All right, and let me check the chat real quick. VMware said a pipe was broken. That's interesting. I don't think I've ever come across that. Yes, and so Catherine said there was a problem with a setting in her BIOS. That setting in your BIOS, many people might come across that, so I kind of want to talk about it. A lot of computers have it disabled for whatever reason to run virtual machines. It may be a security thing. I actually don't know. But all you have to do is boot into your BIOS, and it varies from computer to computer. So if you just Google, like, on my HP Precision laptop, how do I enable the BIOS? And they'll tell you. And most of the time, if you just learn how to boot into your BIOS, you can find it, but it's VTX for Intel, and I can't remember what it's called for AMD, but there's lots of resources. If you can't find it, just shoot me a message. Let me know what hardware you have, and I can help you find it out. Hacks, yeah, that sounds something, and I think it just depends on something. Mine says could not open dev vmon broken pipe. So vmon is a package. So what you might need to do is uninstall VMware and try to reinstall it. That's kind of what that's screaming at me. Is that's actually an issue with the install of VMware. And if that doesn't work, maybe try the player or the workstation or if you're on a Mac, the Fusion. So maybe try like swapping those or something like that. Okay, and Donna asks a great question. They said, when we are done, do we want to suspend or the option close stop? So we're going to talk about that in just a minute. So at this point, once you get to this point, we're actually going to power on this virtual machine. And you'll notice that mine is saying it's restoring the virtual machine state. And that's because I suspended it. So with virtual machines, the really cool thing is just like your computer, your laptop, when you close the lid, it goes to sleep and everything's all good. When you open it back up, everything's right there where you left it. Well, we can do this with our virtual machines. And that's called saving the state. So when I come up here and I hit this little close button, it's going to say, are you sure you want to suspend the virtual machine? Suspend will preserve your environment and data for later use. So if you want to keep everything just how it is, you can just hit yes and move on with life. And next time you open it, it will restore it, and it'll work fine. However, if you run into issues with your virtual machine, you can close it manually. And in fact, a lot of times I will tell you to restart your virtual machine. So let's say you're having an issue and you click up here and suspend it, that issue is going to persist. We've all had to restart our phones and stuff. Sometimes we just need a good restart. So if you click on the virtual machine and go to power, you can power off the guest, and that will just hard shut it down, just like unplugging the power cord, and then you can restart it and it will boot as normal. Okay, so that's that. So, and then Donna also asked, what's the difference between VMware Workstation and VMware Player? And will it make a difference in the class? And so the first question, what's the difference? VMware Workstation has a few more features, like taking snapshots and doing all that stuff, which we really won't use all that much in the class. Where VMware Player is just kind of a way to actually just run it. So will it make a difference in the class? No, it won't. So so you can choose which one you want to use. I use the player just because it's free and easy to download. Because I'll be frank, it usually takes the university a week or two to get those E5 on the hub accounts set up. So in the past, we've actually used VirtualBox because I, you know, couldn't have students waiting a couple weeks to get started. And so I'm really glad that VMware Player is free for students now, because then you can use it. So I would recommend, if you don't have if you can't get Workstation or Fusion, get Player, and you can use that until you get the credentials. And what's really nice is I can do all my changes here. And because they're both VMware products, I could close this and open it up. I could install VMware Workstation or VMware Fusion and actually open up right where I left off in the full product when I get access to it. And then Calvin asks, have I had any students use Proxmox? If you have Proxmox, go ahead and use it. I don't want to get too into it to confuse people, but Proxmox is amazing. And if you have a Proxmox server and want to use it, feel free to do so. I actually have not had anyone use it yet, though. All right. Okay, so we will continue on just a little bit. If you're having problems with the install, feel free to shoot me a private message on Teams, and we can help you get all sorted through it. Sounds like there's a lot of people who are already willing to help, which is awesome. I very much appreciate that. Okay, and so real quick, I kind of wanted to go over a little bit of the lab here. And now that I'm in the virtual machine, it wants to use that. So let's go here. So if we look at this, the instructions are fairly straightforward. And really, most of the lab is getting to this point. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to teach you how to run a script, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, because we're actually going to walk you through all of Lab 1 right now. So that way you guys can see it. So what we're going to do is we're going to run some scripts from the command line, connect to Oracle. We're going to talk about log files a little bit, talk about bind variables. We'll talk a little bit about the data dictionary, and that's pretty much the lab. And it sounds like a lot, but don't worry too much. It's the instructions always sound way more complicated than what it actually is. So, but before we really dive into Lab 1, or I guess along the way, what we're going to talk about a little bit is our little development environment here. So this is Fedora that we're running in our virtual machine, and this is Linux. And for those of you guys who don't know what Linux is or why you should care about it, Linux is an operating system, just like Mac OS. It's just Mac OS now, I guess. I keep wanting to say Mac OS X, but they changed it. So Mac OS and Windows. So it's just your operating system. And some have GUIs and some are just command line. So a lot of your servers are just command line based. And we're going to use the command line a lot in the class, but I'm hoping I will show you how to kind of do both. But we'll be using some terminal, but that shouldn't scare you. It's once you get the hang of it, really, if you want to, you only have to use a couple of Linux commands. But we have everything we kind of need here. So we even inside of our virtual machine, we have Google Chrome. So if you need to submit your files through Google Chrome inside of the virtual machine, you can do that. Or if you want to back them up, I would highly recommend backing up your lab files. So if you can use OneDrive, Google Drive, Dropbox, whatever it is you prefer, you can access it through the Chrome right here on the virtual machine, because you have a full-on web browser here. We also have access to a bunch of other stuff. So we have a console, which is our terminal. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. We also have a GUI tool to work with Oracle, which is our database. So if we want to use the GUI, we can do that, or we can do it through the terminal. you'll see me use a little bit of both. I'm hoping to use a little bit of both. We also have kwrite, which is our text editor or code editor if you want. And you can actually choose to use SQL with it, so then it does all the text formatting for you. And we'll use kwrite a lot as well. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention is that, let's leave and I'll show you the login. So let's log out. So when you're in here, when you first start this up the first time, obviously it's been shut down. So the first time you log in, you'll have to use the password, and the password is can get in. And let's make sure that we didn't die here. Well, let's just power it off. And there we go. Okay. And let's reopen this. Oh, and I think I did. I think I did the wrong one. Okay. Let's try again. Let's try to log off again. But the password is can get in. In fact, I'm just going to type it right up here. Actually, let's just do this. Sorry about that. I clicked the wrong one. Power you right down. But anyways, the password is can get in, CANGETIN, all lowercase, one word, can get in. In fact, let me put it in chat here real quick. It's a good place to put it. Can get in as the password, and it should all be inside of your VMware documentation here. Let's make you big. So if we go to this VMware instance documentation, it has the username and passwords that we're going to be using. So for our operating system, the username is student, password is can get in, and for our database, it's just student. So Catherine asked, why is the VMware called Fedora? And the reason it's called Fedora is because Fedora is actually the name of the distribution that we're running. So just like on my computer, because I'm also running Linux, mine is running Pop OS. And so, when I boot up, it has the little Pop OS logo. So that's kind of what's cool about Linux is you actually get a lot of different flavors, and those flavors are called distributions. And so in this case, our distribution that we're using is called Fedora. And let's kill this. It's a little bit faster. All right. And which one was it now? That's a big question. I think it was the bottom one. All right, so this is what it will look like. When we install, hopefully. There we go. So it boots up, takes its time. All right, so when we get here, this is where you'll put in your password, can get in, and you should just build a log right into our virtual machine. And I have had a few people say that theirs is really slow. And my bet, so one thing that will really slow down your virtual machine is if you are on a 4K screen, it tries to run the virtual machine resolution at 4K. And most of the time, like if you're on a Mac, You got a 4K screen, but you don't have a dedicated graphics card, or your dedicated graphics card is only big enough really to run one 4K screen, um, depending on how that is all working, then it may be a little slow. So you can also change some of your settings um, in your player preferences to change your resolution of the virtual machine, and that will help. So if your machine's running a little slow, your virtual machine, check that. The other thing is also to make sure that you have uh, some things that help is if you have an SSD and enough RAM. And most people have had enough RAM um, and stuff like that. So I would check the resolution first, and if it's not that, send me a message. We can kind of mess around with it, see what's going on. But okay, let's kind of dive into this. So a little bit about Linux here. We've kind of already talked about how it has just about everything. So even if you're on Mac, Windows, it's all pretty familiar. So if you click this little icon down here, this is kind of like our start button. It has kind of all of our stuff down here. So let's go to our favorites, and we have a file manager here. And if we open up this file manager, we can come here and we have our file browser just like we would about everywhere. And then we can go into our file. So this is kind of one you'll want to remember. So from home, all of our work is in a folder called data. So you're going to go into data and then CIT225 and then Oracle. And this is kind of where our home is going to be per se. This is kind of where we're going to work out of, where most of our stuff is. And you'll notice that they already have the labs here for you. They have this lib1 folder, and we're going to talk a lot about that here in just a minute. So what I like to do is I like to show you the graphical way that everyone's comfortable with, but then I'm also going to show you the terminal way. If you choose to do the graphical way, there's this nice little shortcut here. So I'm going to right click in this empty space and then go to Actions. And then you'll notice there's this open terminal here. And what that does is it opens it up so we are in the same path. So that means we're already there. So home, student, data, CIT225, Oracle. And so for those of you not familiar, this is kind of the path to where we are. So we're currently in our Oracle folder. If you click up here, you can actually edit this and you'll notice that our paths are exactly the same. So that's kind of a little shortcut. You can right click, I'll show you again. Right click here, go to Actions, and open a terminal here. If you want to do it from the terminal, you can open up the console, and I call it a terminal, just so you know. If you hear me say terminal, no, I mean the console. We're just talking about the command line. And to move around, because moving around is kind of like one of the biggest things in Linux to learn, I think, because if you can move around and show things, then you're good. So if we look where we're currently at, we can use the pwd command, and we're currently in home student. So I'm going to kind of show you this side by side. So here we are, home student, right? So now we want to go into our data folder like this. So what we do is we type CD, it stands for change directory, and then we're going to do a space, and then we're going to say the name of the directory we want to go to. So in this case, data. And then we can use the ls command to list what is in our directory. So in this case, you'll notice we get the same stuff. So now we're going to do that again. We're going to go to CD space CIT225. Now, we can use tab to autocomplete for us. So if I type a C and then hit tab, it'll fill up to CIT because that's kind of the common thing between all these. And then if I hit tab again, nothing happens. But if I hit tab twice real fast, it will show us all of the things that match that criteria. So then we can hit a 2 and hit tab and it'll autocomplete for us. So that's kind of a nice little trick. Then we're going to list our directory again with the ls command and then move into Oracle. And then that's how we would do that from the command line. Now, if you want to do it all in one step, so let's go back home. So let's say we just open up console. We want to get there straight away. We can just type CD, go data, CIT225, Oracle. And we're there. So that's kind of how you move around. If you want to move back one, so let's say we want to go back to the MySQL folder, we can type cd space period period, and that will move us back one directory. So, and if you want to play around with that, I kind of show you this so you can just kind of play around with it just a little bit. Okay, so someone asked, we need 8 gigs of RAM. If your computer has 8 but says that only 6 is usable, is that still okay? Yeah, that should be fine. Basically what this is it takes 4 gigs of RAM to run this virtual machine. And that's because it's running Oracle, which is pretty RAM intensive database, and MySQL. It might even be running Postgres now. But anyways, it's running a lot of services. It takes some RAM. Oracle is a monster. It is the cookie monster of RAM. I know a lot of people say that about Google, but as far as databases go, it uses quite a bit. So yeah. And Donna says she's getting no such file or directory exists. So if you get something like that, I'm guessing you're talking in your virtual machine in your console. So like if I were to go cd data, it says no such file or directory. So if you type ls and hit return, those are your options, and it is case sensitive. So when you're trying to move around and you get something like that, hit ls, and then you can kind of see where you're at. Now, the other thing to note is that this is all relative. So right now I am in home student data CIT225 Oracle. Well, if I want to go to data, I don't have a file or directory because all I have available to me is what's in this folder. Or I can go back from whence I came with cd space 00. So I can go back here, do an ls. Oh, nope, that's not what I wanted. So let's go back again. Nope. And now I'm in my data. So now I can do cd data because it's in that directory. So I kind of think about it like moving from room to room, but it's from folder to folder. Just like when you're in the GUI, you're here and you can see your where you're at. You can always go back and forward into what you see. So everything's relative, unless you do absolute path. So I don't want to confuse you too much, but one thing that we will use in the class, in fact, if we look over here at our lab instructions, they use absolute path, which means that it will work no matter where you're at. So if I wanted to get to, let's say I'm in 225 or in the lab 1 folder. So let's go to the lab 1 folder. So here I am in the lab 1 folder. Let's say I want to go to my lab 2 folder. Well, I could go back and then into lab 2, right? Or I could go do the absolute path, which is really handy if you don't ever know where you're going to be. So I can go like this. I can say home, student. And what the difference is we have this / at the very beginning, and that means go to the root of the hard drive. So the / at the very beginning means go to the root of the hard drive. So we go cd / home, and that means start at the very beginning. And then from there, we can work all the way up to our lab 2. Right? So something like that. Oh, and it looks like some people are, so what does Fedora use instead of Control-L to clear the screen? I actually don't know what the shortcut is. I usually just use the command clear. Like that, and that'll clear it out for you. And then someone asked what's a GUI, which looks like it was answered, but just so everyone knows in the recording, because obviously I probably forgot to explain it. A GUI is spelled GUI, and it stands for Graphical User Interface, which is what most of us are used to using. So like this window, it has buttons and I can use my mouse. That's a graphical user interface. Well, you'll notice that in the console, if I try to click, right here, I can't highlight and, delete that and change stuff. And that's because it's not a GUI, it's a command line. So that means you have to use your arrow keys and stuff like that. And then Travis asks, is Apex table query also a GUI? And yes, Apex is a GUI, and we will talk about that in a future lab. Yeah, so pretty much rule of thumb is anything with buttons that's graphical. You know, if it has, you know, we've all heard the term a user interface, then it is a graphical user interface. Um, Otherwise, if it's text-based, then it is not. And so, and we're going to dive into that right now. So the way we're going to interact with our database is with a command line utility called SQL+. And which means that we're going to have to use commands and we're going to use text to kind of interact with it. And it's kind of like the back end way in, which most of the time is what you're going to use as far as just manipulating little things. Otherwise, we're going to, and we'll also talk about this too, we'll also create scripts and run those from the command line utility. So that's kind of where we're going to go right now. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up our lab 1. And I'm in the wrong class. Let's go into CIT225 instead of 325. All right, we're going to open up our lab1.txt. Now, by default, this is going to try to open up in SQL Workbench, which we don't want. So I'm going to right-click it and say open with kwrite. And you can change that by default. If you right-click it and go to properties, we can say file type options, and we can say move up kwrite to the top and hit apply, and it's going to change it, and we're good. So now all of our .SQL files will open up in kwrite by default. All right, now my stuff has some stuff in here, so what we're going to do is we are going to wipe this out, because I must not have the right one here. Oh, just because mine's done. So anyways, we'll talk about this. In fact, let's just create a new one. Let's go here. We'll say create new text file. We're going to call it lab1demo.sql. Now yours will just be apply Oracle Lab 1. You can just open up that file. I'm just going to do this so that we can have a blank slate to work with. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to write our Lab 1 script. And what this script is going to do is it's going to, and I guess just as a way of, because one of the things that I was told last semester is, you know, you never even talk about what a script is. Well, a script is just a file that has a preset list of instructions. And the difference between like a script and a program is a program can kind of jump around. You know, it has functions, has classes, and it can jump around. Well, a script will just start at the top and go down. You know, it reads like a book. So we're just going to write our script, and it's just going to start at the top and go down. So let's look at these instructions. All right, so the description says this lab cleans up the Oracle student database. And I guess this is really important because what we do is every time we run our scripts, we clean up everything. Basically, we delete everything you've done, and then it gets recreated because we're actually going to take all of our instructions and save them in these scripts. And this is very good practice. I do this actually with all of my own databases because you never know if you're going to have to spin up a sandbox, right? Or something like that. And so every time we run our script, it's going to delete everything and then rebuild it. So that way, if you change something, it's almost like you're starting with a clean slate every time. That way, no past mistakes are going to come back to haunt you, if that makes any sense. So it cleans up previous work by running the cleanup oracle.sql script. So in our environment, basically all of our preset scripts, all of our utility scripts are in this lib1 folder. So if we come here, you'll notice that there's some files here, but our utility one has the cleanup oracle.sql script. So that's where that one's at. And that's the one that deletes everything. And so it calls 3 scripts in sequence. They are the create Oracle store 2, precede Oracle store, and seeding scripts. The create Oracle store 2.SQL script creates tables. The pre-seed inserts some setup data, and then the seed script inserts application data into the video store model. So if you haven't inferred from this, basically what this database that we're going to be working on for the course of the semester is like a video store rental place. So you can think of something like Redbox or similar. And really it kind of dates back to more like the days of Blockbuster. And those are, it's kind of crazy that time goes so fast that those aren't even around anymore. But that's kind of what we're thinking. So I like to say Redbox just because it's a little bit more modern example. Okay, so instructions. What we're going to do is we're going to edit our apply Oracle lab1.SQL script. And we are going to create 3 log files with, it will create 3 log files with a .txt file extension. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to take and we're going to put this right in our script. So I'm going to Control V that right there. So what these lines do is they call these files for us. So when we put this in here, this is essentially the equivalent of having pasted this whole file in here. So I'm going to open this one up so we can see it. By putting this line in our code right here, it includes everything in this file. So it's actually going to run all of this. Now, the nice thing is we don't have to know what that does. It's going to do it for us magically. And we can move on. So it's going to run the cleanup. It's going to create our tables. It's going to fill those tables with some setup data. Then it's actually going to fill them with our, I guess, the meat of the data. Some sample data, if you will, is the seeding one. So it's going to run those. Now, what I'm actually going to do before I get too crazy is I'm actually going to save this and I'm going to show you how to run it because I think it's really important to test all the time. So I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to open up my terminal. Okay, and when we open up our terminal, I want to make sure that I'm in the same place as this file that we just made, right? Which is back 1, 2, and in our lab1 directory. So I want to make sure I'm in here. So I'm actually going to show you the easy way to do this. So let's close our terminal here. So if I'm here, I'm going to right click, go to actions, and say open a terminal here. And you'll notice it says what directory you're in right there. So I'm in lab1, which is great. I can do an ls command and oh, there's my lab1 demo.sql. Perfect. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to open up our SQL Plus. We're going to actually log into the database so we can actually run this guy. So let's go and run our program. So we're going to type SQL Plus, and that's the command to launch our program. And then we're going to give it our username, a /, and then our password. Now, this isn't very secure. Normally, you wouldn't do this because everything that's in this terminal is logged. So most of the time, what you do is you can actually just type SQL Plus student, hit return, enter your password, and this is where you'll type student, and it'll say you're connected. But just so you can see the other way, you can type SQL Plus student / student, and it's just, I always do that, studnet student. This is your username, and this is your password. So I'm going to hit enter, and it says we're connected. And this means that everything's good. Now, you'll hear me often refer to this as a SQL prompt. If you see the word SQL here, that means we're in a SQL prompt, meaning that we're interacting with our database. So any commands we issue are database Oracle commands. All the commands we've done previously, if there's this $, that means you're at a bash prompt. So if you hear me say a bash prompt, I'm talking about Linux commands. If you hear me say SQL prompt, we're talking about SQL here. So, and I try to be pretty specific in instructions. So, but just so you know, if you're aware. And I'll reiterate that a few more times. So if you're not catching all this as we go, we are moving pretty quick. Don't worry about it because I will try to reiterate multiple times. All right, so now that we're here, what we want to do is we want to execute our file here. So how we do that is we type an @ symbol, and then we just put the name of the file in here. So for me, it's going to be at lab1demo.sql. For you, it would be at apply-oracle-lab1.sql. And then I hit it, and it's going to actually do that stuff, because even though we only had 4 lines in there, it runs all those previous files for us. And then we look here, and you'll notice that there's some stuff there. You know, we see Star Wars, we see Hook, all great movies. The Hunt for the Red October, my personal favorite. And that's good. That means it worked, right? Which is really awesome. But then if we go back, so we executed. Now if we go back and look at our lab 1, you'll notice that it is now a mess. We went from having 2 files, or 3. We had this tutorial directory and these 2 files here, to all of a sudden we have all this crazy stuff. Well, these are our log files. So if for whatever reason there's an error, we can actually open these up and see what went wrong, because that way we're not trying to scroll with our terminal. So if I open up the terminal, you can see that it would be pretty tedious. So when you're writing these, what's really nice is you can open up your terminal here, and or open up your log file and actually see everything that happened. So now that we've run their scripts, what we're going to do is we're going to edit our file here, and we're going to add some stuff of our own. So real quick, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a comment. I'm going to say run the cleanup script, and then I'm going to say run the setup scripts. Separate those out. So there's some comments, and now I'm going to say lab 1. And you'll notice that when you start lab 1, it's actually going to kind of say start your lab here. You know, it'll say put your lab code here. In fact, let me see if I can find a good example here, because I think lab 1 has some stuff in there. But if we go to like lab 3, yeah, so it'll say enter code below. So they kind of have some files set up for you already. So you would just put your code in this gap right here. So that's kind of what we're going to do. But we're going to put ours here. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we want to start our log file. Oops. I guess that helps if I'm in the right window here. So the first thing we want to do is start the lab log file. And the way we do that is with a spool command. So let me zoom this to fit the width. There we go. So we're going to spool this, and what spool does is it creates our log file. So we're going to say spool apply oracle lab1.txt, and we could call this whatever we wanted. If you want to keep it more simple, you can just say lab1.txt. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call my log file lab1.txt. Okay, and while I'm at this, I'm just going to go ahead and down here at the bottom, I'm going to say stop the log file, because we have to tell it when we're done. So, and we do that by just saying spool off. And I'm going to put all my code here, because basically we start the log file and end the log file here. So anything between those 2 lines is going to be output to the log file. Then what we're going to do is we are going to declare a session level bind variable. So that sounds pretty complicated, but basically what we're doing is we're going to create a variable that exists only while we're kind of in our session. So what that means is as soon as I quit running the script, essentially that bind variable is going to disappear, or rather when I log off of the database, that bind variable is going to disappear. It's not permanent. So one thing that I kind of like to explain right off the bat with databases is, as you can imagine with a database, the whole purpose is to store data. And more importantly, we want to store data permanently. You know, that's kind of the whole point. We don't want it to be volatile. And so like the data itself, a lot of our structures, a lot of our things like our tables, you know, you think of like an Excel spreadsheet, basically our tables are permanent, meaning that, you know, I can shut my computer off, and when I turn it back on, that table is still going to be there. All the data in it is still going to be there. So what we mean by a session level bind variable is that we're going to define it now, but it's not going to be there forever, like the tables and such. So I'm actually going to take, and we're just going to copy this, and you can feel free to copy it too if you want, or if you learn by typing it out, feel free to do that as well. But basically what we're doing is we're creating a bind variable called bind variable, and it is a varchar2, which is a string for those of you who are already versed with programming languages. It's a character string, so meaning we're going to store text here, and it can be 30 characters long. And then we're going to assign a value to the bind variable. So just like a normal programming class, basically we're going to take our variable, x equals 3 essentially, but we're going to say our bind variable, we're going to say lab1 is complete. That's the text we're going to use. Okay. And then finally, we're going to get that value from here. So let's paste this. And you don't need to worry so much about this kind of stuff because it's just how it's formatting it. But right here, we're selecting the bind variable. So as the column name from Dual. So let me show you this real quick. So basic select statement. The way databases work, so we actually already have our data in here now. So we have a table in here called contact, and we're going to talk a lot about tables next week. This is more just to get you set up. So I'm going a little bit above and beyond here. If you wanted, you could just take and copy this code and run it for lab one. If you're in a bind, just do that, get lab one done. But I am going to kind of explain things a little bit as we go here so they kind of have some context. So we have a table called contact, and you can imagine this being like, an Excel spreadsheet, essentially. And inside of our Excel spreadsheet, we have data, right? And let's make this a little bit better. So I'm going to set line size to 250. And then we're going to rerun that. So there, that looks a little bit better. So you can see that here we just have some data. It looks like an Excel spreadsheet. It's just obviously not near as neat and clean. And let me try to make this a little bit better so you guys can see. Let's try again. There we go. That looks a lot better. So you can kind of see we have our columns up here, and then we have our rows. And in here you can see we have a lot of people. We have Randy and Brian Wynn. We have Oscar and Doreen Visquel, Megan, Matthew, and Ian Sweeney. We have Jeffrey Clinton. We have some different people in here. But think of it like an Excel spreadsheet. Now, a big part of databases is creating the database, which is what we will do a lot of this class. But how we're going to kind of start is actually, because we already have this database here, is we're going to learn how to get data back out of it, right? Which is kind of the whole purpose of the database, is we want to use the data. So we're going to learn how to pull data out of our database. And the way we do that is with select statements. And select statements are actually fairly straightforward. They were actually written to be understandable by business people. The original creators of SQL thought, hey, let's build something that we don't have to, that, our bosses can do, so we don't have to do it for them, right? We all know how that goes. So, but anyways, it's more straightforward than like what I would consider like a traditional programming language to be. So for example, let's say that I just wanted a list of everybody's first name. I could go select, because that's what we want to see. And then we list what we want to see. So in this case, I want to select first name, right? So I'm selecting the first name column, and then I say where. So I say from, and I'm sorry, I said where. We need to know where we're getting our data from. Which table are you trying to get data from? Well, I want to get it from the contact table, right? And then we add our semicolon to end the statement, and we hit return. And now we just have a list of all the first names. So basically we just have this one column. Okay. Now let's take that one step further and say that we want to get the first name and last name from contact. Well, we can just add a comma, and now we have the first name and last name of every person in our contact table. Now we're going to take it even one step further, and let's say your boss comes to you and he says, hey, I want everybody whose last name is Sweeney. So we have our query here, select the first name and last name from contact. We're going to add one more, and we're going to filter this data. Now we're going to say where last name is equal to Sweeney. Add our semicolon, and then we only have Sweeney people. Right, so that's kind of just like a real basic start there to those select statements, and we're going to talk a lot about that next time. But if you want to play around with it, you can go ahead and do so. But the main reason I wanted to show you that is because that's what we're doing right here, is we're selecting this bind variable. So basically what we're doing is we're selecting lab1 is complete from dual. So to kind of put this in perspective, let's try to mimic this the best we can. So select lab1 is complete as BV variable from dual. So dual, just so you know, because you'll see dual a lot, dual is a way of selecting from thin air, because lab1 is complete isn't in a table. We're just kind of put it there as a raw string. So dual is a memory table. So essentially it's selecting from nothing. And then when we say as, we're saying that's the name of our column. So I could do the similar thing to say, you know, this is our column 1. You know, and it just changes our column name up there. And we could select whatever we want. And so just so you know, dual is how we select from thin air. But I just wanted to explain that a little bit so you kind of could understand it a little bit. All right, so that will pull that stuff. And then we can additionally put on some stuff. And you could actually skip this if you wanted, but we'll put it in there. And I missed something, didn't I? Oh, it just formatted it really weird in 2 columns. So anyways, if you want, you can put that on. I'm actually just going to leave it off. And then we have our spool off. Oh, I scrolled. That's why. So you'd actually put that before, but it doesn't matter too much. So we have that. And then let's grab this right here. Hopefully this doesn't. So if they look a little different, so if we open up lab 1, let's go into lab 1. So the lab 1 here has all these instructions on how to get it and set up. And then it has this right here where it says after you download the image, refer to these instructions. And that's what you should download a PDF for you, or open up a PDF window. And from there, you'll see the same thing I'm seeing. And also, I'm glad you brought that up. So in the past, we have used McLaughlin's website for all the instructions, but they have changed this drastically. So make sure you're using the instructions in Canvas, because labs 1 through 5 are going to be very different. All right, and so then for this last step, we're going to just run this little select statement, kind of like we talked about. And I'm going to explain this one just a little bit too. It looks like we're going to be writing this from scratch. So basically what we're going to do here is we are getting our information from the data dictionary. And the data dictionary it's kind of funny. I've always thought this is kind of like a catch-22 in a way. Whenever we create a table, so like our contact table, the way that the database actually even knows about all that stuff is it uses its own database. So basically the database holds the database. And it kind of is weird. But we can get all of our table names that we have created from that data dictionary, which is exactly what we're going to do right here. So we're going to get the table name, right, from user tables. where the table name is not in, and basically what we're doing here is we're excluding all the sample tables that come with the database and all of the system tables. Table name like demo. So like Apex, we're not going to show that. We're not going to show the demo tables. Employee and department are some of the demo tables that ship with Oracle by default. And then we're going to order those by the table name. So we're just going to order them alphabetically. And we can actually take this. Let's just take this statement we just wrote. And we're actually going to paste this right in our terminal. So when you want to paste in the terminal, you can either go up to edit and paste, or like it shows up here, you can hit Control-Shift-V. But you have to hit Control-Shift-V. A lot of people could try to hit, Command Paste or Control-V. But if you hit Control-Shift-V, then it will actually paste in the terminal. But we can run that, and you'll notice here we get all of our tables. So we get the address table, common lookup, contact, basically all the tables that our scripts created for us. And that's what that's going to do. So once we're there, I'm going to hit save. So Calvin asked a great question. For the lab, do we need to put those commands in the console or in the file? And you'll actually put them in the file. I like to run them in the terminal. And in this case where you're copying someone else's, it's not so much a big deal. But in the future, when you're writing your own, I like to run them in the terminal first, just because that way you're not trying to save and run, because you can just paste them right in there and run them. But for this lab, you can just put them right in your script. So you'll put them right in your script, make sure your script is saved, and then we're going to come back here and we're going to run our script. And so again, how we run that script is we do an @ symbol. And if you ever forget what the name of your file is, you can do !ls, and it'll show you all your files in here. So then you can see what you need to type. So in our case, lab1 demo. In your case, it would be apply Oracle lab1.sql. But we're going to do our lab1 demo.sql. And remember, it's going to run all that old stuff, but then it's also going to run our new stuff down at the bottom, because it ran our, it runs all the stuff in these files, and then it hits ours. And so then we can see what's right here. And, everything looks good. But we can also go to our lab1 folder. And now, because we ran our log file, there should be a file in here called lab1.txt. So if we go in here and do lab1.txt, if I can, right there it is. And if we open this, only the stuff that matters to us is in this log file. And so, on this one, it's pretty easy, but in future labs, when you have thousands of lines, it's really nice to be able to hit Control F and search for error or something like that. That's how you can find your issues. So anyways, but that's our log file. And so now if I'm the student, because that's the entirety of lab 1 right there. So now if I was you guys, what I would do is I would open up iLearn. Wow, go back a couple years. I would open up Canvas, and you'll submit this lab1.txt and your apply Oracle lab1.sql file. So you'll submit those two files, your log file and your .sql file. And the reason we ask for both is, it helps us really check your work, but more importantly for me, it helps because then if there is a problem, I can help you diagnose it, because I pretty much have everything that I need in those two files. So you'll submit your .sql file that you put your work in, and your lab1.txt. So in my case, what I would do is I would just take these two right here, and those are the two that I would upload into Canvas. Does anyone have any questions so far? I know a lot have been asked along the way. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay, so if you have a question, feel free to throw it in the chat. If it's really complicated, you can unmute yourself and ask, because we're kind of that point. So if you have a question, just try not to talk over each other. So that's why if you want, type it up, or you can get on your mic.
Can I unmute and ask?
Yes, you may.
All right. So I'm trying to understand the point in this lab. So I've already run the Apply Oracle Lab 1, but I ran it before I wrote my select statement. So is that bad?
No, in fact, let's take a look. 'Cause I'm not even sure if there's where is my apply Oracle? There it is. Okay, so in here we actually have almost everything we need except for that last little select statement. And if you've already ran it, that's great. You're in fact, I already ran mine. So if I were to go to mine and let's just kind of mimic that. So I'm going to take this off. I'm actually going to cut it so I don't have to rewrite it. So I'm going to save that and I'm going to rerun that script again. You can keep rerunning these scripts, and what it will do is it will just rewrite that log file. So now if I open up my log file, you'll notice that mine probably looks exactly like yours now. It's missing the select statement for the tables. So all you need to do is open up your file, your .sql file, and go and add that select statement, save it, and then rerun it. So now let's rerun that file. And now if I go back to my lab1.txt, and you'll notice because I had it open, it's actually going to say it was modified. So I'm going to reload it so I get the changes, and you'll notice now that just pops in there. So you just have to rerun it and resubmit. And realistically, I'll be honest with you, I don't really care so much if you have this. This is nice because I can see that your setup scripts work. But the point of this lab is really just for me to make sure that your environment is up and running. So, I'm not going to get too picky, but yeah, that's what you would do is you just add that select statement into your file, rerun it, and re-upload. And then Sunday asked again which files we submit. You will submit the, let me close some windows here so we're not too busy going on here. You will submit your .sql file and your .txt file. So whatever, so in my case, mine is, yours would be Apply Oracle Lab 1, but then you would also need to submit the log file that you specify right here. So in this case, lab1.txt. In the instructions, they have it, you call it Apply Oracle Lab1.txt. But you can call it whatever you want, just as long as the .sql file and the log file correlate, then you're good. But whatever you put after the spool command here, that's the one you want. So if you're using the default script, it is going to be apply Oracle lab1.txt. All right, so I can actually run that file right now. So if I run that file, come back here, now I should have my apply Oracle lab1.txt. And I can open that. And you would add your select statement, but once you do that, then this file and this file are the ones you submit. Great question. Any other questions? You can submit from your normal OS if you want. Now, there are some ways you can set up like file sharing stuff between your host machine and whatever. You can also write it all on your host machine and then copy into here. Like I know a lot of students, like if you don't have 8 gigs of RAM, or if something's slow on your virtual machine, you can always write your work on your host computer where it's fast, and then just paste it into the virtual machine and then run it from there. That way, the only thing that's slow is you running it. You're not living inside of it, if that makes sense. So either one, whichever works. And I also know a lot of people, like I said, I would recommend backing it up to whichever method you choose, whether that's emailing it to yourself or putting it in your drive or whatever. So you can back it up. Once you finish, back it up, then download it on your host computer and upload it, or you can just upload it straight from inside the VM. Yes, and I actually do. I used to recommend and show Git quite a bit, and I would, make sure your repositories are private. Obviously, if you're using Git, but I used to show Git, but I don't want to get too into it because it can get complicated. So if you know Git, feel free to use Git. All right. Well, we are almost at an hour and a half mark. So if there's no other questions, um, that's lab one, and we're going to talk a lot more. And I know we covered a lot today, but there's kind of information overload. Don't stress too much. I've seen some people say they're nervous about this class, and you don't need to be, because it's actually we'll just take it one step at a time, and you will learn a lot in this course. In fact, I heard from my manager at Oracle. He said he loved BYU Idaho students that came out of this program because they knew the equivalent of people who had been in the industry for 2 years straight out of college. So, we are going to learn a lot, but we're going to take it one step at a time. Um, and we're going to get through it. It's actually not even too much. And like I said, that's kind of why I try to help you, because most of the people that I think struggle the most are those who are hesitant to ask questions, and that sort of thing. So if you run into a problem, just ask a question and we can help you out. We'll get you moving. So it should be good. Don't need to sweat over it. We're going to have a lot of fun. It's going to be great. And it just is a little, I guess, last minute motivation. The last 2 semesters I've had, last 2 terms, I should say, um, in each term, I've had 2 students, one in each term, that have been significantly impacted by their experience from the course. So, which is really fun for me to see. And I hope, that there's at least someone out there this helps. One person went from being a secretary at Nike to getting a job on the data team. Because she was in this class, they heard she was in this class and started working with it. That she did a stretch assignment and got the job. A similar story with someone else, and I read somewhere that or saw somewhere that someone was doing interviews and were asked how much they know about databases this term. So, I hope that I've seen a lot of impact on the students that take this class, because it is extremely, extremely valuable. And you will come out well prepared. And there is a shortage of database people. A lot of people, I think, when we all kind of start into our college programs, unless you have some sort of former knowledge, most of the time you're going in to be, the next Facebook programmer, or, that next iOS programmer or whatever. And no one ever thinks about the database, but it's extremely important. And even if you are, I know there's quite a few software engineer majors in here. And at the end of the term, we actually go over full stack. In fact, I have a whole blog ready. Last term I wrote it, and we made a web application that connected to our database. And so, database is just an extremely valuable skill. And if anything, you learn how to organize data, and it's a lot of fun. It actually really is. It's more exciting than what you think. Okay, and then Travis says the reading could seem overwhelming, but we're not expected to remember it all the first time, right? And absolutely. I kind of like to run the course, and I've heard this from students, that, and this is kind of what I say. The reading to me is more of a reference. So, and I'm glad you asked that, because that reminded me kind of what I like to do, what I like to recommend. If I were a student, I would start with the lab every week. So I would do the lab, and as I come across things, just like you would if you were kind of starting your own project, I would look up things as I come across them if I don't know what they are. So, um, a variable, maybe do some Google search, look it up in the book. The nice thing about having an electronic book PDF is you can Control F and search it. Look up select statements and all that kind of stuff. I kind of would just use it as a reference. And I try to hope, I try that in these videos, and this one's kind of a little weird because we do a lot of housekeeping in week 1, but I try to teach as much concepts as I can in the video so that hopefully the reading is almost purely just a reference material, um, or supplemental material. Because I hope that by the time we end this, your understanding is the foundation is built, so to speak. And then as you do the lab, as you get your hands dirty, you kind of flesh that foundation and kind of build on top of it. So yeah, thanks for asking that because yeah, you're not, especially the Oracle database PL SQL programming book, that is not one you're going to start from chapter 1 and read through. In fact, I have it on my shelf and I do use it pretty frequently. And it's just when it's like, okay, I need to know on a very, very deep detail, how does the select statement work? Like and we'll talk about this in a future lab, but what order do these things execute? What are the really minute details of all these little things? And that's when I jump to the book. So that's fine. Yep. So if you've run it 3 times and you're not getting a lab txt file, check your spool command and make sure you have whatever comes after the spool command. That's what the name of your file is going to be. And then, and you want to make sure that's in there. And then if that's in there, you can always try. It should just auto reload, but it shouldn't need to load. It's not like Windows where it has to refresh the directory. That always made me chuckle because it should just pop in there. But yeah, and it's a little bit hard to see, but basically look for any .txt file, and you can actually even change the view here somewhere. View mode right here. Let's do compact. That might help you find it a little bit easier because I know it can get messy. You've seen me kind of have to double check a few times. Yeah, so in mine, because I didn't want to override anything, mine was a little different. Whatever you put as a spool file, whatever comes after the spool command, that's what your log file is going to be, and you can name it whatever you'd like. By default, it's apply Oracle lab1.txt. But you can use whatever you'd like. I don't care as long as it's the proper log file, right? So I would name it something, but I know a lot of people by the end, as they get more comfortable. So if you're comfortable with it, a lot of people just call it lab1.txt like I did. A lot of students by the end of the term, a lot of them start out doing it this, but you kind of get sick of typing apply _Oracle _, and so they just get to where they just do lab1.txt. Good question. But yep, so what I would do before you upload, I would just check your log file, just open it up, make sure it's right, make sure everything looks good, and then you can submit it. And you don't need to get worried. Like if you submit the wrong log file by accident, you'll definitely get to resubmit. Oh yeah, so Donna asked, how do we change it so when we open a .sql file, it opens in kwrite? So yeah, for sure. So what you'll do is you'll right click on the .sql file, and then you'll go down to properties. And then once you're in here, you'll click this button that says file type options. And then you'll click on kwrite. And so like by default, it looks like this. So you'll click on kwrite and move it up, and then you'll hit apply and OK. And then it should open in kwrite. Are we allowed to modify the apply script or write a separate one as you did? You can do whatever you'd like. Yeah, you can do exactly what I did. If it is easier for you to start from scratch, feel free to do so. And you can call it whatever you'd like. Like I said, as long as you submit the right files, it doesn't matter to me. So you can either edit the apply Oracle Lab 1. That's kind of what it's there for. It's kind of there so you can just edit that file. But if it's beneficial to you, you want to write your own, you can do that as well. You could also just copy this one. So I could take this file, copy it, and paste it. and call it, we could say my Oracle Lab 1.SQL or something like that, and you could just copy it and then edit that one from there as well. So however you want to do it, feel free. All right, any more questions? These have all been great. I'm never feel bad about asking a question, because I know you guys that are in here, but there's a lot of people that are going to watch this later. And so it's good that you ask these questions, because they are great. They really help fill in the gaps that I miss. So I very much appreciate the questions.
As far as Linux goes, is there any, besides the command line, the Linux command line, is there any other resources that are good to help build knowledge on the Linux operating system?
The Linux command line is great. Other than that, there's, and I was always learning by doing. So I would say play a lot, but I don't know of a great, like, just specific resource. I'm sure you could Google it. I think there's some free courses out there, like on Coursera, and stuff like that on Linux, that I'm sure would be good. If you're interested in Linux in general, there's a lot of great podcasts out there. Linux for Everyone is one of my personal favorites. And I guess, just as, I'm glad you asked that, as a plug for Linux. Linux is one of those things that I feel like anyone in the technology field should know. Just as, in case you weren't aware, I would probably say 98 or 99% of all the computers running like web servers is Linux. Almost, when I worked at Oracle, almost all of our clients were using Linux servers. In fact, when someone called you about an issue on a Windows server, it was like, okay, who's going to take this? Because everyone was trying to pawn it off, because it as far as like from a technical aspect, Linux just works. It's great, and that's why I use it as my desktop. But that aside, it's something you're going to want to know, because as far as developing server administration, that sort of stuff, I would almost guarantee that you're going to get out there and you're going to be using Linux in some way, shape, or form. So I'm glad you asked that. I don't have a great solution, because I've always kind of just done the whole, I'm going to get in it, and as things come, excuse me, my voice is about a shot. As things come up, I'll look it up either online or in the Linux command line. But great question. I wish I had a better answer for you. I will try to see if I can find like a good resource, but I would check there. If you want something a little bit more formal, I would check like on Coursera or some of those free courses, something like that. And you could probably even get a certification out of it. All right. Any other questions? I usually try to keep these to about an hour and a half. Obviously, the first one is always a little bit more, and you guys have asked great questions, so I'm very glad. But does anyone else have any other questions? All right. Well, just to reiterate, if you have any questions, feel free, get on Teams, ask on Teams. That I think that'll be very beneficial to everybody. When you ask a question on Teams, most of the time someone else sees that, and if you're the first one to ask a question, you might help 40 other people with there. So that's what I would say. If you have any issues or anything comes up, feel free to ask on Teams. And for those of you that are having issues with various things with installing, we'll work with you. We'll get those figured out and move on. So anyways, thanks everybody for coming. I hope this was worth your time. Sorry for keeping you a little bit longer than normal. But yeah, good luck this week. And if you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.